I met my wife, and we were married within months. My wedding gift to her was $300,000, and everything was settled in just a month later. 8 months later, our son was born prematurely, but thankfully he was perfectly healthy. At the time, I felt like the luckiest man alive, but that feeling lasted only until our son turned 1. That's when I began to notice something strange. My wife, Anna, would often take our son to hang out with her brother. Then, one day, I realized that our son and Anna's brother looked almost identical, although nephews are more like their uncles. I overheard someone say that my wife and her brother are not related by blood at all. I came home to find my son Neil playing with toys in the living room, while Anna Miller greeted me with a smile. "George, you're back," she said, her warmth melting away the stress I'd been carrying all day. Anna Miller and I had met through a mutual friend 2 years ago. After a quick introduction, we hit it off within days. We confirmed our relationship, and after a month we were married. Her family insisted on a $300,000 wedding gift, and without much thought I agreed. For me, that amount was no big deal. Soon after we were married, Anna Miller started feeling morning sickness. A checkup confirmed she was pregnant, and I was overjoyed. I put everything on hold at work to focus on waiting for our baby to arrive. But things didn't go as planned. In her 8th month, Anna Miller went into early labor. Luckily, we got to the hospital in time. Mother and baby were both safe, though our son was born prematurely. Despite that, he was healthy and showed no signs of complications every day when I came home from work and saw Anna and Neil. I truly felt like the happiest man alive. Now, it's been a year since Neil was born. He's grown into a healthy, happy boy who's sitting in the living room, grinning from ear to ear while playing with his toys. I let go of Anna and walked over to Neil. "Did you buy him some new toys?" I asked. Anna smiled and shook her head. "No, Henry bought them. I was often so busy with work that I didn't have much time to spend with Neil. Most of the time, Anna would take him to her brother Henry's house. Henry always bought Neil tons of gifts, so many that his room could barely hold them all at the time. I didn't think anything of it. I just figured Henry really loved his nephew. I picked Neil up from the floor, still clutching his toy. "Neil, Daddy's home. Say hi to Daddy." I teased him, but before I could finish, Neil burst into tears. It happened every time I picked him up. Anna rushed over, took Neil from my arms, and after a few gentle words, he stopped crying and started smiling again. It was as though I wasn't even his father. I was just a stranger to him. Anna gave me an exasperated look and muttered, "I told you to come home more often." Neil, starting to forget who you are since Neil was born. I'd been so busy with work that I barely came home. There were even a few times when I came back too late, and both Anna and Neil ended up sleeping at Henry's house. So, when Neil reacted like this, all I felt was guilt. I just hadn't spent enough time with him. I sighed and said, "It's just that work has been crazy lately." Anna shot me a sharp look. "You're always busy, but for what your salary is not even that great. I don't even know what you're working so hard for." I chuckled and didn't say much more, hoping I could surprise her. And Neil, once work settled down. Anna went to soothe Neil, and I dragged myself into the kitchen to start dinner. After I finished, Anna went to the bathroom, and Neil was left with me the moment he saw me. His face crumpled, and tears began to flow. At that moment, Anna's phone lit up curiously. I glanced at it. The lock screen was a family photo, one of me, Anna, and our whole family with Henry in the picture too. A new message from Henry popped up. He asked if Neil was enjoying the new toys he bought for him. Neil, seeing the photo on Anna's phone, pointed at Henry and shouted, "Daddy, Daddy." Neil's words were a bit unclear, but I could still make out that he was calling for Daddy. I was about to share the joy with Anna when I suddenly noticed Neil's finger pointing at Henry in the photo on the screen. I hadn't spent much time with Neil, mostly leaving it to Anna to take him to visit Henry. I never thought much of it, just regretted that I hadn't been there for Neil more. That's probably why he was calling Henry Daddy Neil. Once I'm done with work. I promise I'll take you out and have some fun, I said, feeling guilty as I comforted him without realizing it. I started comparing Neil to Henry. Physically, they looked like they were cut from the same mold. It said that nephews look like their uncles, so I didn't think much of it. Anna came out of the bathroom, and after we had dinner, she put Neil to sleep. She lay beside me in bed, but tonight I suddenly had the urge to be intimate with her. However, she pushed me away with a concerned look. Loving the twists? Hit subscribe now for more amazing stories. She said, "You have work tomorrow. Let in wait until we have more time." I didn't press the issue, just closed my eyes and fell asleep the next morning. As I arrived at work and started wrapping up my tasks, one of my employees came in to inform me that there was an issue with one of our partners. Reluctantly, I had to handle it myself. After things were sorted, I was on my way back to the office when I realized that Anna's parents' house was nearby. I decided to stop by and visit them, so I bought a gift. The parking lot in their neighborhood was already full, so I parked outside, and with bags in hand I walked toward their building. As I passed by, I overheard a group of elderly women chatting. Brian Miller's son came home again yesterday. Look at my son, how long does it take for him to come back? Brian Miller, that was Anna's father's name. I realized they must be talking about Henry. Curious, I slowed my pace to EES drop on their conversation. I heard that Brian Miller's son isn't even his real son. I think they adopted him. The conversation felt like a bombshell. Henry wasn't Anna's real brother. My mind raced as my thoughts spiraled out of control. I stopped dead in my tracks. They've got a great son and a great son-in-law. When they asked for $300,000 for the wedding, they didn't hesitate. My son-in-law had to haggle with me for that. I also heard that their daughter and son were involved with each other before Wait, so the son-in-law is really the unlucky one. The women's gossip was likely mostly fabricated, but my mind couldn't ignore what they were saying. I thought back to Neil looking exactly like Henry, and the idea that Anna and Henry might not even be related by blood. That meant Neil may not be my biological son, and the way Neil pointed at Henry's photo and called him Daddy. The more I thought about it, the more my head spun. I decided against visiting Anna's parents. I turned around and walked back to my car. The more I thought, the more complicated it all seemed. Finally, I made up my mind would secretly arrange a paternity test for myself and Neil. I needed to know for sure, was Neil really my son? The workday was over, but I stayed in the office with no real desire to go home. The fact that Henry wasn't Anna's real brother kept replaying in my mind over and over. I checked the time. It was already 9 p.m. My phone buzzed with a message from Anna asking when I'd be home. I hesitated for a long time, picked up my phone, made up a reason for working overtime, and sent it back to Anna. She responded with an OK emoji. I stared at the chat screen where our family photo was set as the wall wallpaper. Whenever I faced difficulties, I'd look at the picture of Anna and Neil, using it to encourage myself. But now, for some reason, every time I looked at it, I felt a tightness in my chest. I didn't want to believe that Anna and Henry could have been together, but I couldn't shake off the thought. I remembered that Neil had been a pre-A, normally premature. Babies are at high risk, but Neil had been unusually healthy at the time. I thought it was just luck or divine intervention, but now I wondered if Anna might have already been pregnant before we even met. The more I thought, the more confused I became. Finally, I decided to go home and arrange a paternity test for Neil the next day. When I got home and opened the door, Anna immediately walked over to greet me. "George, you've had a long day," she said, trying to hug me. I pushed her away a bit, feeling irritated. I'm pretty tired. I just want to sleep. Normally, I would have welcomed her affection, but the thought of Henry possibly not being Anna's real brother made me feel repulsed. Anna paused for a moment but didn't say much more. Neil's already asleep. Do you want to see him? I shook my head. He'll wake up if I go in, and then he'll start crying again. Anna poured me a glass of warm water. You worked late today. I took the glass, but I looked at the rim, suspicious. She might have put something in it. I set it down without drinking. I leaned back on the couch. There's a lot to handle at the company, I said, coming up with a casual excuse, not wanting to share what was truly on my mind. Anna sat next to me, giving me a look. Maybe you should just quit your job and work for Henry. You could probably be the head of security there. It would be better than working at your company that barely pays anything. She didn't know that I owned the company 2 years ago. The business ran into some trouble, and I kept it from her to avoid worrying. Her things had started turning around recently, and I was planning to tell her the good news. Soon, I closed my eyes and asked did Henry come by today. Anna seemed puzzled by my question, but answered yes. He was here. He had a great time playing with Neil. I scoffed quietly to myself, but didn't say anything. What would you do in this situation? Would you forgive or walk away? Let me know in the comments below. I hadn't drawn any conclusions yet, so I held my tongue. Anna continued. Did you hear what I said earlier? I refused her suggestion, saying I was tired after a quick shower. I went to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. No matter how I lay there, my mind kept racing the next morning. I woke up early, I carefully got out of bed, and before Anna could wake up, I went into Neil's room and cut a lock of his hair. I had to know the truth. I changed clothes, didn't bother with my morning routine, and left the house in a hurry. I went straight to the hospital and found a trusted acquaintance who could arrange the paternity test after hours of waiting. I finally got the results. The report said, without a doubt, I was not Neil's biological father, that I thought I was prepared for this moment. But seeing the results with my own eyes felt like a thunderbolt had struck me. The truth was right there in front of me. Anna had indeed cheated, and with none other than her brother Henry. Everything suddenly made sense. How could my son have been a pre-A? It was clear. Now she must have been pregnant before we even met and rushed to marry me for cover, and I had foolishly given her $300,000 to me. $300,000 wasn't much. It was just a drop in the bucket, but for an average person it might take years to earn that. No wonder Henry treated my son like his own, because in truth he was his own son. I sat in the chair feeling like a fog had descended over my life. Just then my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. It was the company's general manager calling. I answered the call, and the voice on the other end was quick to share some good news. George, thanks to you, our partner agreed to go ahead with the deal. We've officially weathered the storm. The news lifted the fog in my mind like a breath of fresh air. This partner was the key to the company's survival. Once the contract was signed, it meant that for the next few years, as long as nothing went wrong, the company's assets would exceed $100 million. At that point, I could stop working so hard I'd just leave everything to the staff and live comfortably off the profits. When I heard this, my first instinct was to share it with Anna. Then I stopped myself. Why would I share anything with that cheating woman? Not only that I needed to transfer my assets as soon as possible, now that I knew the truth I was going to ask for a divorce. There was no way I could continue like this, and if Anna caused trouble I needed a way out without wasting another second. I called Marcus. Marcus and I had grown up together. Though not blood brothers, we were as close as family. When I told him everything, he immediately agreed to help me. I temporarily transferred the company to him and sold all my assets at a fraction of their value. Marcus, holding a glass of fine red wine, looked at me with a smirk. What's your wife's brother's name? He clearly didn't like what had happened to me and was eager to help me get back at them. I took a sip of my wine and replied, Henry Miller? He works for some construction company. Marcus chuckled. You won't believe this yesterday. One of my employees was caught selling off equipment. His name is also Henry Miller. I suddenly remembered Marcus also ran a construction company and straightened up. What does he look like? Can you show me? Marcus Q quickly pulled out a photo. The person in the photo was none other than my Henry. What a coincidence with that. I started planning my next move. They took $300,000 from me and thought they could walk away scot-free. No way. The next thing I did was buy some cheap gifts and head to Anna's parents' house when they saw the items barely worth $100. They rolled their eyes and quickly tried to rush me out. Didn't want me to stay for dinner, but something caught my attention. Mrs. Miller was complimenting Henry way too much. Even Mr. Miller looked annoyed by it that I remembered Anna. Once telling me that when Mrs. Miller was young there had been a man she loved but couldn't have. It was Mrs. Miller who had suggested adopting Henry and bringing him back into their family. If there's no connection between these events, I'd never believe it. Mrs. Miller spoke up. George, how's work been lately? I hear from Anna that your company keeps making you work overtime and pays you so little. Why don't you come work at Henry's company? He has some influence there. He could easily make you the head of security. Mr. Miller chimed in from the side. I'm planning to buy a better car this year and I could use your help with that. Mrs. Miller went on, when Henry gets married and has kids, he'll need help buying a house, a car. You've paid off your apartment right when he gets married, just transfer it over to him. This family had no shame for the sake of an adopted son. They were draining their real son-in-law dry. Anyone who didn't know better would think Henry was the biological son. Mrs. Miller's words confirmed my suspicions. I couldn't help but sneer to myself. I didn't say anything, just nodded along. It looked like this trip had been worthwhile. If my suspicions were right, the Millers were about to put on quite a performance. I left Anna's parents' house and drove straight home. Standing at the door, I saw a pair of men's shoes. I recognized them instantly. Those were Henry's shoes. They must have been at it for a while. I tried the door, and sure enough it was locked from the inside. If it hadn't been locked, I might not have had the chance to catch them in the act. Now they'd given me the perfect opportunity to expose them. I knocked loudly on the door. Anna, I'm home soon. I heard frantic sounds coming from inside. I could already picture what was going on in there. If only there were cameras, I'd record it all. A few minutes later, Anna appeared, her hair a mess, her clothes disheveled. She tugged at her collar and hurriedly explained the baby was too noisy. I was just comforting him to sleep then, in an attempt to change the subject. She said, "Why didn't you let me know you were coming home today?" I didn't confront her, pretending to be exhausted. I replied, "I took the day off to surprise you and the baby from the looks of it." This was more of a shock than a surprise. Anna rolled her eyes and scolded me. "Your salary's already low, and now you're taking time off to surprise me. You just ruined your full attendance for the month. How are we going to pay for the baby formula next month? Are we borrowing from Henry?" I didn't respond. Instead, I pointed to the shoes on the floor and asked, "Whose shoes are these?" Anna became flustered when I asked her about the shoes. She quickly explained. Henry came over. "Ah, so Henry's here," I said, still not taking my shoes off. I leaned against the door frame and peeked inside. I didn't see Henry anywhere, but I did catch the strong scent of air freshener. I asked again, "Where's Henry, Anna?" Quickly made up an excuse. Henry was playing with Neil just now. But Neil peed on him. He is taking a shower. Now the air freshener is because of that. Anna's lie was so obvious that it was hard not to see through it, but I chose not to call her out. I pretended to believe her, afraid I might continue to question her. Anna snapped, "What's your problem? Are you worried I'm sleeping with another man, George? I've been a dutiful wife for a year, and now you're suspecting me and you're even suspecting Henry." I couldn't help but admire Anna's ability to turn everything upside down. She could make something black seem white, suppressing my anger. I apologized. "How could I ever doubt you? I didn't mean anything by it." Seeing that I was backing down, Anna's attitude grew even more arrogant. "Your doubts upset me, so transfer me $1,000. I'll take the baby and Henry out for a meal." I asked, "What about me?" "You stay home and rest. You still have work tomorrow, and I heard that I was so angry, it almost made me laugh. So they're going out to have fun, and I'm the one who's paying reluctantly. I agreed. Fine. But I only have $500 on me. How useless. Anna sneered. $500. What's that going to do? Whatever, just transfer the rest later with that. She tossed me a towel. Take this to Henry and watch the baby. I'm going to put on some makeup. She turned and went inside without another word. Anna had always been like this, pretending to love me but constantly finding fault with me. I used to think I was lucky. Now I just felt foolish and naive. I stood up, took the towel to the bathroom, and handed it to Henry. He thanked me as he took it. As for the baby, no, it wasn't my baby anymore. I didn't care. I sat on the couch, staring at my phone while he crawled around the floor, rummaging through the trash. And then he even started licking the floor. If this had been before, I would have scolded him, but now he wasn't my son. Why should I care, moreover? Even if I keep a cat for a year, it will still act coquetty-assly towards me. But this kid, he's never given me a kind look whenever I pick him up. He hits me and cries, non-stop. Neil acted like a fool now, and I even began to wonder if he and Anna had done something to cause this child to turn out like this. When Henry finally came out of the bathroom, Neil immediately got up and ran toward him. "Daddy, Daddy?" Henry, smiling apologetically, said, "Sorry, George, I've been taking him out a lot recently. He's been misunderstanding things." He kept apologizing, but his smile never left his face. I simply responded, "It's fine. I haven't had time to spend with him either." Neil ran a few steps toward Henry, but suddenly tripped and fell to the floor with a loud thud. I bit my lip to keep from laughing. Henry didn't even bother drying his hair, rushing to help Neil up and check if he was okay, but Neil ended up with a bloody nose. I couldn't help but ask you. "All right." Henrik's face was full of concern. "Be careful. Look what happened to you." After comforting Neil for a while, Anna came out and immediately blamed me for not being responsible. After exchanging a few words, the three of them left. Once I confirmed they were gone, I walked over to the towel Henry had used and found several of his hairs on it with his DNA. It would be much easier to track down his information that I didn't waste any time either. As per my plan, I called in an installer to set up a hidden camera in a quiet corner. The camera was placed in such a way that it was nearly impossible to find unless you were really looking, and it had a clear view of the entire living room. I also had one installed in my bedroom. For good measure, by the time everything was set up, it was already evening. The installer had only left half an hour ago when Henry returned with Anna and Neil. I was sitting on the couch watching TV when I heard them exchange affectionate goodbyes. When Anna saw me lying on the couch, she pointed at me and scolded, "What are you still doing lying there? I've been out walking with Neil for so long and I'm exhausted. Go get me a glass of water." I refused bluntly. "I want to rest." "You're the one who always tells me to rest, aren't you?" I added. Anna shot me a cold look and started changing her shoes. She turned to Neil and said, "Neil, when you grow up, you need to be better than your father. Don't end up useless like him. His salary is low, and he can't even do a simple task without complaining about being too tired." Her words made me laugh in disbelief. When we got married, I agreed to give her $300,000 up front. Without hesitation. Was that really useless since we got married? Anna hadn't worked a single day, using the excuse of pregnancy and raising our child to stay at home. I never once held back from providing for her good food, better living conditions. I even occasionally brought home fine meals to improve our diet. I didn't need to worry about paying off any loans for the house or the car. And let's not forget, I also owned a company in terms of financial security and career stability. I was leagues ahead of most people, and yet I was the useless one. I found myself wondering, how had I been blind enough to agree to marry Anna in the first place? I didn't respond, which only made Anna angrier. She accused me of not even trying. Then went to put the child to sleep once Neil was asleep. She came out of the bedroom with a blanket saying, "Uke, sleep on the couch tonight. Look at you, so spineless, lazy and useless." I just smiled in response. Her punch felt like it hit cotton completely. Ineffective. Anna gritted her teeth in frustration, threw the blanket down, and stormed back into the room. I was more than happy to sleep separately after all with Henry's reputation. Who knew if he had picked up some sort of disease out there, the couch was more comfortable than the bed. I fell asleep quickly and didn't wake up until the next morning. After I got up, I took the hair samples I had collected from Henry and went straight to my police officer friend. He listened to my story and was more than willing to help without hesitation. He began investigating Henry's identity. It took 2 days, but finally I received the results. My friend sent all the information to my office. After opening the envelope and skimming through the details, I learned that Henry Miller's real name was Alex Gray. His biological father had been killed 15 years ago over gambling debts. His mother abandoned him after that and sent him to an orphanage. Eventually he was adopted by the Miller family, as I suspected Henry's biological father had been Miller's wife's first love. I couldn't hide my smile. If Mr. Miller found out that Henry was the son of his wife's old flame, would he still have a peaceful life? The results of the investigation were more than satisfying, and I eagerly anticipated the spectacular scenes that would unfold for the past 2 days. I had spent almost all my time at the office. I hadn't gone home once, instead busy working with the lawyer to draft the divorce agreement. Not long after I reviewed Henry's information, Marcus called. He informed me that he had already fired Henry and demanded compensation. If Henry didn't pay, he could face up to 3 years in prison. I told Marcus to hold off on the lawsuit for now. I would deal with everything in due time, and then suing Henry wouldn't be an issue. Marcus didn't question my reasoning, but cooperated fully with my plan for revenge. Once I learned Henry had been dismissed, I immediately accessed the camera I had installed at home. Sure enough, Henry had already arrived when Anna opened the door for him. He immediately wrapped his arms around her waist and kissed her passionately. By now, I had no emotional reaction to Anna. Their actions didn't even faze me after they broke apart. Henry spoke with venom in his voice. My boss found out I've been selling building materials. He fired me and threatened to throw me in jail unless I pay him back. Anna, looking worried, responded, "What are we going to do? How much do we need to pay?" So she could worry about someone else. After all, I sighed and shook my head. I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. If anything, the more affectionate they became with each other, the better. After all, the cameras were recording everything. Henry continued, "The market value is around $2 million in compensation. $2 million. How are we supposed to come up with that?" Anna sounded completely helpless. Henry's expression turned cold and he sneered, "Anna, why don't we buy an insurance policy for that waste of a husband? George, then we can sell his house." My face stiffened. I had never once thought about harming them physically, but this bastard Henry was planning to kill me for an insurance scam. I sneered to myself. If that's what you're planning to do, then don't blame me for being ruthless. I gathered the entire conversation on the cameras, patiently waiting for the day of my revenge. Of course, just sending him to jail wouldn't be enough to satisfy by me. But I had special means, and I'd built enough connections to get a few of my own people placed inside the prison. Getting him locked up wouldn't be a problem. Anna, without hesitation, agreed to Henrik's plan. All right, it's not like George is Neil's real father. He still has some value before he dies. As they continued their conversation, they embraced again, throwing their clothes to the floor. Neil, hearing the noise, started clapping and giggling. What a show this was turning out to be. Just as they were about to continue, Henry suddenly pushed Anna away. She froze, her face full of confusion, as if something had gone wrong. Henry started cursing. "Stupid. George scared me a few days ago, and now I can't get it up anymore." I couldn't hold back my laughter at that point. Seriously, was he that much of a failure? I'm glad I wasn't drinking water. I would have sprayed it all over the place just now. Henrik's expression was fierce. "I'll make that idiot George pay for this, so arrogant. Think I'd pay the price. He really doesn't know his place." Next, Anna tried everything she could to get Henry back on his feet. Henry, feeling a bit better, grabbed Anna by the shoulders, showing a look of impatience. They even started discussing whether they should have another child. Then they could give the child to me to raise. They wanted to hurt me and have me raise their child at the same time. Want to have fun? Not possible, I thought to myself. As I came up with an entertaining idea, the cameras not only recorded their conversations but also allowed for two-way communication. I waited for the perfect moment and said, "I've already recorded everything you two just said." They both froze in fear, especially Henry, who collapsed to the floor. The energy he just gained vanished instantly. He was so scared that he pissed himself all over Anna. I could see the yellowish liquid spreading across the floor through the camera. I didn't even want to imagine how bad it smelled. Anna panicked. "George, I've recorded everything that just happened." I reminded them, "George, you bastard, how could you secretly install cameras in the house?" Anna, still oblivious to her own mistakes, was blaming me. Instead, I couldn't help but admire her shamelessness, even with the undeniable evidence in front of her. She still had the gall to direct blame at me. I sneered. "I'll have my lawyer send you the divorce papers. Please make sure to get out of my house as soon as possible. If not, I'll take legal action." As I spoke, Anna had already found the camera by following the sound and yanked it off the wall, smashing it on the floor. The next second, my screen turned black and white. I couldn't help but laugh. Did this woman really think that destroying the camera would make the evidence disappear? I contacted my lawyer, and he promptly arranged for a legal notice to be sent out with the plan in motion. The conclusion to my revenge was already set in stone, so I called Marcus and took him out to eat and drink. Using the little money I had left, as for Anna, all her contact information had been blocked, including Henry's. Just as I was having a good time, Mr. Miller called. I thought he would offer me some words of comfort, but instead he started right off with, "George, you're really not a good person. Anna and Henry aren't even siblings. Even if they made a mistake, there's no need to send out a legal notice. And what about Neil? He's your real son now. You have a kid, and you're still talking about divorce. You have no responsibility at all." Mrs. Miller's voice came through as well. "You're such a failure. Anna is willing to stay with you. But once you divorce, who's going to want to be with you?" Marcus, who overheard the conversation, couldn't stop laughing. "Are you guys out of your minds?" he said. "George, back then, you didn't blink an eye when you brought out $300,000. How could you be a failure? He owns a company. Sure, it had a rough patch a couple years ago, but it's turned around now. Soon his assets will easily be worth over $100 million. Before long, he'll have as many women as he wants." Marcus's words left the people on the other end of the line silent. Mr. Miller's tone softened a bit as he spoke to me. "George, no couple should hold grudges for long. You have a son. Now you can't just leave him without a father, can you?" I casually replied, "He has a father. It's Henry, the son you adopted." I added, "By the way, Henry, the company you work for, is owned by one of my friends. I've already gathered the evidence of your embezzlement. If you don't pay up, expect to go to prison." Once I finished, I didn't give them any chance to respond. I immediately hung up the phone. I also blocked all contact information related to the Millers. Marcus asked what was going on. I told him everything exactly as it happened. He couldn't stop laughing after hearing the whole story. "What's your plan?" Now Marcus raised his glass and clinked it with mine. I thought for a moment and said, "Letton, watch the drama unfold." Mark didn't quite get what I meant, so he asked again. I didn't answer him. Instead, I just pushed him towards the barbecue. After a satisfying night, I thought I'd sleep peacefully. But the next morning, I was woken up by a phone call from an employee. The employee on the phone told me that a group claiming to be my wife's family had shown up at the office, shouting about divorce and wanting a share of my assets. I couldn't help but smile. I quickly dressed and headed to the office. I had to be there, otherwise I would get to see the Millers' reactions when I arrived at the office. Anna and her family were already sitting in the meeting room, where the lawyer had arranged for them to wait. I walked in and looked at them, feeling satisfied. It was good that they all showed up. Otherwise, it wouldn't be as interesting. Anna glared at me the moment she saw me and immediately started yelling, pointing at my nose. I just wanted to see if she'd still be able to smile. Later, seeing that I wasn't moved by her insults, Anna stopped yelling and switched to talking about the divorce. "George, I'll tell you this. I'm willing to divorce, but you have to give me half of your assets." Mrs. Miller nodded along. "My daughter has suffered for 2 years with you, and the law says marital assets must be split equally." Mr. Miller slapped the table and said, "And don't forget, Neil's child support $500,000 a year, not a cent less." They knew Neil wasn't my son, but they were still trying to use him to extort me. It really goes to show how far people will go for money. They'll even throw away all dignity. Henry. Ed, his teeth. "You made me lose my sexual function. So you owe me $2 million in emotional damages faced with their unreasonable demands." I calmly responded, "Right now, my assets are zero. You won't be getting a single penny. Not only that, I'll also be suing Anna for adultery during our marriage. As for Neil, he's not my son, and the law won't support your claim." They called me shameless and brazen. They tried to pull at my emotions, but I wasn't swayed. I coldly added, "Don't think. I don't know that you secretly sold my house. You'd better give me back every penny I'm owed. I have plenty of time, connections, and energy." My words made them hesitate, and they no longer dared to push further. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss more. Then it was the lawyer's turn. He explained my financial situation, telling the Millers that my assets were basically zero. They didn't believe it, so the lawyer went on to reveal that I had already transferred my assets to Marcus once they heard the truth. Anna looked as though she might explode with rage, but this was my turf. As soon as she stood up, security quickly moved in to hold her down. Mrs. Miller started throwing a tantrum, you say? "Neil's not your son, but really, is he not your son? Unless you can provide proof." When she said that she didn't have any conviction behind her words, she was even a bit nervous. And that's exactly what I was waiting for. I sat back on the couch without saying a word. My lawyer pulled out 2 paternity test results. He told Mrs. Miller, "This one is the paternity test between my client and Neil, and this one is the background check on Mr. Henry." When my lawyer presented the paternity test between Neil and me, the Millers were able to understand that part. However, they couldn't figure out why I brought out Henry's background information. What did that have to do with the divorce? Aside from Mrs. Miller, no one understood the reason at this moment. Mrs. Miller seemed to realize the truth might be exposed. She snatched the papers from the lawyer and tore them to shreds, shouting at me. "What is the meaning of this?" Mr. Miller, noticing her reaction, seemed to remember something. His face turned as dark as a pot's bottom. I didn't panic. I gave my lawyer a glance he instantly understood, and pulled another set of documents from his briefcase. "No problem. I have backups." Mrs. Miller tried to grab them back, but Mr. Miller beat her to it. Her face instantly drained of color and her lips trembled. Mr. Miller opened the papers and began reading. The more he read, the darker. His expression became his teeth grinding in anger. Anna and Henry leaned over to look as well. At first, they had no idea what was going on, but when they saw the contents, Mr. Miller slammed the documents onto the table, his voice booming. "You've been raising my rival's son behind my back. Do you know? He once stole your parents' medical funds to gamble. You've always claimed you forgot about him, but you're actually raising his son with me." Anna immediately understood. It turned out Henry was Mrs. Miller's first love's child, instead of addressing her own mother. She turned on me and began shouting at me. "George, are you out of your mind? You want to ruin my family, don't you? So what if I cheated? Does it really have to be this petty? So what if she cheated Anna? Really had the audacity to say that I remained silent, knowing this was about to become a stage for the Millers to perform." Anna turned to her mother. "Mom, tell him off." But instead of defending her daughter, Mrs. Miller and Mr. Miller began to argue. "Brian." Listen to me before she could finish. Mr. Miller stood up and slapped her across the face. "I don't want to hear your explanations. Tell me after we got married. Were you still messing around with him?" Mrs. Miller stammered, holding her swollen face, but couldn't speak a word. This was enough to confirm Mrs. Miller's betrayal. Anna tried to step in to stop it, but her father slapped her hard across the face, dislocating her jaw. She collapsed unconscious. Mr. Miller spat on her worthless. "You and your mother are both as for Neil." He crawled up to his mother, wiping his snotty hands on her face while laughing. "Mommy, Mommy." Henry stood up to calm Mr. Miller. "Dad, please don't be angry." But Mr. Miller slapped Henry as well, yelling, "Get lost." I can't believe I've been raising my enemy's son for over a decade. What was once a united effort by the Millers to extort me had completely fallen apart. This scene to me was far more captivating than the Mona Lisa's smile. Mr. Miller shoved Henry aside and grabbed Mrs. Miller, beating her senseless. The fight was so brutal that Mrs. Miller's teeth were knocked out. Henry, now knowing the truth, rushed to defend Mrs. Miller. The two of them started fighting fiercely. My lawyer, the security staff, and I immediately stepped aside to give them space. Anna just lay there while Neil continued to laugh stupidly. I really should have taken a picture of this during the scuffle between Mr. Miller and Henry. Mr. Miller began to lose ground, frustrated. He grabbed a chair and threw it at Henry. Henry collapsed to the ground, but Mr. Miller wasn't done. He kept beating him. It wasn't until he had broken Henry's back that he stopped at this point. I dialed the police by the time the police arrived. Henry's lower body was paralyzed. Treatment was practically impossible, and to make matters worse, he was drowning in debt. I felt no sympathy for him whatsoever. If the police hadn't been there, I might have applauded. The Millers were taken away by the police later when the police came to gather evidence from me. I asked for an update on the situation. It turned out that Henry, after being crippled, insisted on appealing, which resulted in Mr. Miller facing a sentence of over 5 years. For the next month, it was all legal battles between Anna and me, with the overwhelming evidence against her. Anna lost the case I had prepared in advance. She walked away with nothing. As for the child, it was naturally awarded to Anna, while I walked away free. I also had Marcus file a lawsuit against Henry. That paralyzed, disabled man suffered almost inhuman treatment during this time. No one in the family would care for him, and he couldn't afford a nurse. His lower body nearly rotted away when the police went to check on him. They almost fainted from the stench. Henry's mental state deteriorated, and he became a complete mental patient. Later, the police came to see me again, telling me that Anna had been hospitalized. The reason, when Anna was climbing the stairs, Neil pushed her down the stairs for fun. The police came to ask me what should be done with the child. I shrugged. He's not my biological child. I have no obligation to take care of him. In the end, the child was given to Mrs. Miller. She came to me several times, begging me to pity them and give them some money, but I ignored her. The last time I saw her, hair had turned completely white. Neil still couldn't speak a full sentence. What happened to the two of them afterward, I'm not sure, but they had completely disappeared from my life. I got my original shares back from Marcus, worked hard, and in just a few years the company's market value soared to over $1 billion. I didn't know if I'd ever marry or find love again, but at least money wouldn't betray me.